What we'd like to do before we go into some more specific questions is have you tell us a little bit about how you entered the freedom movement,
Well,
or a lot of it, however you want to do it.
well, I'll tell you a lot. That's because the background that leads up to things, I think, is in many ways as important as the events. I grew up in an area of Arlington called Buckingham Apartments. It was brand new garden style apartments, very cutting edge for its time. And it was also known as virtually the only place in Arlington that would rent to Jews. And all these folks who had come for the government New Deal jobs, a lot of liberal Jews from New York, and my parents from Georgia and Iowa. But now folks have met up and they're starting families and they need someplace better than a boarding house. So I would say that 85%, I once calculated, of my playmates in the neighborhood were from liberal New York Jewish families. Now, they weren't trying to convert anybody to their way of thinking. I found out years later that our Christmas presents were hid in the top of their closets, and their kids swore to secrecy they wouldn't tell us few Christians what we were getting for Christmas, and they wouldn't tell us there was no Easter bunny. But I think a lot just sort of was absorbed from that environment. Then, the more immediate, in my mind, moment of decision was when I was about 10 and we were visiting Grandma down in Oconee, Georgia. Now, we're not talking that fancy resort. We're talking the old logging town. And dirt poor community. Twice a day, the train came barreling down the middle of the road, dirt road, and down the middle of the dirt road were the train tracks. And that train was the Nancy Hanks. You know who Nancy Hanks was? Abraham Lincoln's mama. So you know that train was owned by a Yankee, right? So, same playmate every summer, Mary, and we sort of dared each other one day to go walk through what we called Nigger Town, down past what my cousin had told me was the Coca-Cola bottling plant. I think now it was really just the sawmill, but that's a recent renovation. And so we snuck off and went down there. And as poor as it was in the white section, I mean, they'd just gotten running water a few years before, and little fish might come through, so you didn't drink it. It was so much worse in the black area. And people just sort of disappeared into their houses behind. They'd be out sweeping their yards, you know, no grass. You'd use a broom to sweep. You've heard of that.
Mm-hmm.
And people just made themselves scarce. Nobody was going to know anything about these two little white girls coming through. And that was sort of creepy. And then we got to the school. And it was a one-room shack. Never had any paint on it. Door was ajar. You could see the pot-bellied stove. No glass in the windows, just wooden shutters. No grass in the yard, no playground equipment. There was one outhouse, as I remember it. So what I tell audiences of young folks is unisex bathroom thing ain't nothing new. They had that in Oconee in the 1950s. It was depressing. And I knew at the same time, this is before Brown versus Board, out the other side of town was a brand new brick school. Brick for the white kids. It was the fanciest building for miles around. Still is, only now it's a senior citizen place. And just staring at that school for the black kids, I knew it wasn't fair. It was not treating people the way we wanted to be treated, which the Bible taught us, treat people the way you want to be treated. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, I believe is the quote in King James. And I knew, though I couldn't really have put it in words, but I knew when I got the chance I was going to do something to make the South, I didn't care about them Yankees, but to make the South the best it could be for everybody, for all the Southerners. Now, you've got to remember that back then, folks identified every bit, if not more, with their state or even county as they did with the United States. And those New Englanders, they're still New Englanders. They're first and foremost, right? And so I was focused on the South as a Southerner. And my chance to really do something, well, when I was in high school, probably around 58, and massive resistance, state law, not some large gathering, state law, massive resistance said that every school in a school jurisdiction could be closed if one school were integrated by one black child under court order. Everything could be shut down, like it happened in Farmville. And we were afraid that was going to happen in Arlington. And I went to the Sunday evening youth meetings at the Presbyterian Church. And we always had a spaghetti dinner and salad, same old thing every week. And we were told one week that next week, some colored, that was a polite term, black was rude, but some colored students would be coming to our meeting. Don't tell anybody. Don't even tell your parents. Well, for one thing, the American Nazi Party headquarters were literally around the corner. They could show up. They were known to show up and cause a disruption. Sort of like the Klan. The police could come and arrest everybody for breaking the public assembly law by sitting down and even eating together. Never mind just sitting down, eating even worse. And some of the church elders, deacons, whatever they were called, could lock us out. So we kept it quiet and learned that the black Y was behind this. Who initiated, whether it was our minister or the Y, whether it was happening in a lot of churches or just ours, I don't know. Still don't know. Tried to find out, still don't know. But they came twice and we had good fellowship and discussion. I think that was my first foray into this sort of thing. And then when I was at Duke, voila, sit-ins. Durham was the second city to have sit-ins. I went to the Presbyterian youth meetings Sunday evening, and we were told one Sunday evening that next week there will be some students who are involved in the sit-ins from North Carolina College. They will be coming to our meeting to explain about what they're doing. But don't tell anybody. The rowdies could show up and cause a disturbance. The police could show up and arrest us, or the administration could lock us out of the building. This was sort of, deja vu. And they came, and these well-dressed, well-spoken college students, and explained everything in legal and moral terms. And then they invited us to join them in the demonstrations. That was it. My mother was absolutely horrified. She was, what could she tell the relatives? What would her friends say? I mean, she grew up in very rural Georgia. She was born in Nicholson, which is out past Athens, a good ways. And the family would not understand. Awful. But she'd grown up where the church, the law, and society all strongly supported not just segregation, but superiority, inferiority. And this was beyond belief. Now, my daddy, who had grown up in south and west Iowa, where George Washington Carver was the hero to the kids because he always brought peanuts when he came to visit his friend the doctor. He supported what we were doing, but he felt as a good government bureaucrat, we all know about good government bureaucrats, that you change the law at the top so that it affects everybody. It's not just this guerrilla warfare of, one lunch counter here, one lunch counter there. And of course the students felt, and you've heard of Brown versus Board, and how much of an influence has that had by 1960. And I think mainly Daddy was afraid that his darling little girl was going to get killed, which, could happen. But it was a divide. My parents had always really differed on their opinions on the race issue, but they just sort of had other things that they agreed on. Let that one be.
You talked about your family. What was the response within your social network, your friends? Were you an outlier? Did they think you were doing something courageous? Did they think you were doing something crazy?
I know I didn't really think about the impact it would have on me. I was, 18? But my college roommate, who was from New York, she also went on the demonstrations. And there were a few girls on the hall. Duke was pretty Southern, who just did not speak to us anymore. And on the other hand, there were those who were slipping us money.
Oh, is that right?
But, they couldn't, because of their father's job, they couldn't, didn't feel they could participate.
And what was the response of the Duke administration?
The Duke
to
administration.
like seeing someone like yourself, and I assume, were there any other white students
Yeah,
who
there
were
were a bunch of white students. Mostly
Okay.
It was graduate school
Okay.
guys. Those good-looking graduate school guys. Y'all know about them.
They would probably disagree, but yeah. The good-looking part, the graduate school guys, yes. The good-looking part, I'm not so sure.
But now where was I? Yeah, there were a handful of us, and the administration sort of went ballistic. We didn't have any problem just picketing, but when we got arrested, that was when it really got nasty. Lucia and I got out of jail and got back to campus after dark, and back then, when you came in, there was the reception area in the dormitory, and you had mailboxes there, and there was a note in ours that we were to report immediately to the dean's office. So we went across this dark campus, and in the administrative building, there was one room with a light on, you could see. We knocked on the door, the dean of women let us in, locked the door with a key, jiggled the key, dropped it in her pocket, and told us to have a seat. Tried to get us to promise that we would never do anything like this again. And have you called your parents yet? Well, no, we came right over like we were asked to. There's the phone. So we had to call our parents and tell them we'd just gotten out of jail. And then they tried to find out if we were feeling under stress or unhappy. Neither one of us had gone to pledge week with the sororities, and this was just unheard of, that we were not interested in joining the sorority, though I came to that when I got to Duke. And when I got to Tougaloo, but not at Duke, I just didn't see going and sitting in front of a bunch of girls you didn't know to see if they were going to pick you to join them. I wanted to know them first, just being like you were trying to pick the best chicken or something to butcher. Anyway, we had not pledged and had made history that way already. And but perhaps we needed psychiatric, some counseling and stuff, and we had a little of that imposed on us.
So you actually had to go to psychiatric counseling.
Well, I don't know, psychiatric, psychology, but we had to get.
You had to receive counseling.
We had to receive counseling
for participating in a
sit-in. Yeah, and some of the graduate school guys that had campus jobs lost them, but they got reinstated with the press. The only thing that kept us from being expelled, as I came to understand it, was that the University Professors Organization, whatever it's called, voted for us. And faculty, in my experience, was very supportive. I had one English professor, and I did not like English. But he was good for pop quizzes. And I told him that there was a demonstration planned for the day of the next class, and if I happened to be in jail and he gave a pop quiz, could I make it up when I got out? And he laughed and smiled and said, "Oh no, I'll bring it down to the jail cell. You can't cheat in there." But no pop quiz. He didn't bring me anything, but he was very supportive.
So there's no record of pop quiz from a Durham jail?
No.
Not to join letter from a Birmingham jail, pop quiz from a Durham jail?
No.
So this is...
Sorry.
Do you remember what month this was? I take it, obviously, it's after February of 1960.
I think this was probably April, so I've got all my clippings. But...
Okay. And was the decision of the Duke students obviously inspired by Greensboro? Was there communication with other campuses in the area? Anybody from NC State or at Chapel Hill?
Not with the Duke students that I know of. Now, the students at North Carolina College would have been in touch. But Duke, no. And it was getting on late. Now, I understand that founding meeting of Snick, there was consideration of sending me to represent Duke, but it was decided that a white girl at that could endanger other people. And so they picked a guy, which people say, "Oh, that's gender discrimination." Well, no, that was common sense. And I don't view it as anything otherwise. It's just common sense. Yeah, I could have endangered them. That wasn't a good idea. So I was not at the founding meeting of SNCC.
So you finish your first year at Duke, and then you come home for the summer.
Well, I had it with Duke. I knew I wasn't coming back, and got a government job. And yes, but now the students at North Carolina College, when they knew I was going up to D.C., asked me to check what was happening at Howard because they hadn't heard anything from the Howard students since the SNCC meeting. Back then, making a phone call was a big production, a long-distance call, no internet, all that jazz. So I said, okay, and I wasn't quite sure, being from Arlington and this white girl, where Howard University was, but I found my way and walking around campus feeling a little, out of place, obvious type thing, asking if anybody knew any students who were involved in sit-ins or supportive action or, that type of thing. And it turned out a meeting was being held. I forget if it was that night or the next night, but found out where and went to that and explained who I was, asked, was a huge meeting. And when they found out that I was from Arlington and had been arrested a couple times, they were pretty pretty welcoming because they were planning sit-ins in Arlington, and I had, knew my way around, and knew the jail routine, so I was most welcome to join them. I sent a letter back to the North Carolina College students, and sat in Arlington. And we started down at Peoples on Lee Highway, which is now CVS, and moved on up to Drug Fair. About half of us, it was pretty calm down there. We didn't get served, but nothing happened. So about half of us walked about a mile, I guess, up to Drug Fair in the Cherrydale neighborhood, and sat in, and again, pretty peaceful. We just in June had the dedication of a plaque, unveiling of it, on the building where the drug fair was, and so that group from Howard called themselves NAG, the Nonviolent Action Group. We used to like to have fun with the names of things. NAG. And we sat in a bit, maybe a week worth of sit-ins, and then called a break so that the officials could talk with the store managers and what have you. Now, most of these store manager types were from that liberal New York Jewish background, and the guy who founded Drug Fair, Sergeant Buckingham, and my father and he were on first name basis, and he was one of them liberal New York Jews. So basically, they had no problem with serving us, no personal problem. But the state law said the people who ate together could be arrested. We could even be arrested for, sitting there together. But also the manager or the person who enabled you to sit together could be arrested. So I guess these, guys weren't ready to go to jail that day. Was, their main thing. But once the prosecuting attorney in Arlington said they were not going to enforce the law, no arrest, then we were served. Went and sat in again down Shirlington, where we had sit-ins, and not been served, and resumed the sit-ins and got served there, and then in Buckingham.
So this is the summer or the fall of 1960?
This is in June.
June of 1960.
Yep, June of 1960.
And you've made your decision that you're not going back to Duke.
No way in hell.
Did Duke
or
help
heaven.
Did Duke help you make that decision, or did you make that decision
I
for
made that
yourself?
decision on my own, but
Okay.
I didn't need that. I had not wanted to go to Duke. I had gone to Annandale High School, which was totally overcrowded, and I wanted a small church-related school where you would actually be recognized individually. What a concept! You would be crowded in like sardines, and I wanted to go to Muskingum College in Ohio, and my mother wouldn't have it. I had to go to this prestige name school. Who ever heard of that little college? And I think really she wanted me to go to a name school that would be segregated. I found out later that John Glenn had graduated from Muskingum, but and his wife had been my Sunday school teacher, and I used to sit with them in church, and I often have Sunday dinner with them over at the minister's house. But small world.
So as the fall of 1960 approaches, what decision are you making about school? Have you gone back to school yet?
I had not gone back to school, but when I saw what happened with Charlene Hunter, aka Charlene Hunter Galt, and Hamilton Holmes at the University of Georgia, tear gas, driven off campus twice, things like that, riots. Okay, I saw what happened in Georgia, in Athens. The next town up the road is Commerce, and the next one after that is Nicholson.
Right.
This is where my family is from. And I felt that integration is not 2 or 3 black kids at a time going through hell. It's got to be a two-way street. And I thought I would apply to a black college. HBCU was not yet in the vocabulary, at least not that I knew of. And I knew I didn't want to go in Georgia because I had too much family there. It could endanger them, which I had no right to do. And so I didn't like to just jump into things on my own. I had joined the sit-ins in North Carolina and in Washington at the invitation of the groups there. And so I wanted to talk this over with Snick kids at their fall conference. And there were several of the guys around. I don't remember any of the gals, but why would I? And they said, yeah, that's a good idea. And if you're going to do it, you may as well go into Mississippi, because those students haven't had any sit-ins or done anything yet, and you can help them get started. So Tougaloo was the only college open to blacks that was accredited, and I wanted to get a degree in an accredited college. So I applied to Tougaloo. And then my high school, Annandale, refused to send my transcripts. Tougaloo contacted me. They had not received the transcripts. They got it from Duke. And so I called and talked to the counselor, and there was just no way. They would not send it there. She didn't say the reason, but she wasn't going to do it. She didn't need to say the reason. I knew. She knew. And Tougaloo said, well, they'd accept me just on my Duke transcripts. That was okay. So then along comes the Freedom Rides. Now, Freedom Rides left from Washington. We got to meet the folks who were going. That first Chinese meal called the Last Supper that John Lewis had, that was at a restaurant managed by one of our NAG members, Paul Dietrich. And we saw them off. Hank Thomas went. Stokely did not, contrary to what you might think from Taylor Branch. Which I've called Taylor Branch out on, putting him in Montgomery. But I did that from the stage in some college up in Baltimore. He took it good-naturedly. So Hank was on the bus that was burned in Anniston, and he's standing outside the bus in the pictures. And so following Gandhi, of course, then where one person falls and can't continue, the others have to take the place. So folks started from other sit-in groups heading down to take the place of those who couldn't continue. And Paul Dietrich of Last Supper fame, Dion Diamond, who was really in that picture that Taylor Branch said was Stokely, and John Moody were the first ones to head out. Now, Nashville, Diane Nash's crowd gets credit for keeping things going, but the DC group was out the door just as fast. It just takes longer to get down to Birmingham.
And by this point, you consider yourself like a member of NAG. You're full in. You're all in at this point.
Yeah, I've all been. Well,
just want to clarify for people.
Yeah, it's been a year since I got in. But actually, our DC group was second only to Nashville in total numbers of people that went on the Freedom Ride. And keep in mind that we had maybe 50 members max, and they had hundreds. So percentage of our group that went on the Freedom Rides, we had them beat real good.
Mm-hmm.
But I consider Diane a friend, and Bernard, and John Lewis and the crowd, they're buddies. But we did outdo them. So then our group met up with the Freedom Rider crowd when they got to Montgomery, and they were in the church when it was surrounded, by the mob and the tear gas and all that. And each family unit could send one person to the basement of the church where there were 2 phone lines to make a call of maybe 2 or 3 minutes. Well, Paul Dietrich knew I had a phone in my little efficiency apartment right by the bed. Middle of the night, I get this call. Joan, this is Paul. We're trapped in the church in Birmingham, in Montgomery. Can't talk, just send more riders. So we started rounding up people, and then June 6th, a group of us flew down to New Orleans, and that's when Stokely got on the Freedom Rides. I like to say I brought Stokely on the Freedom Rides. And we got a day or two of orientation. It only cost $50 to fly to New Orleans back in the day. And then we took the train, the Illinois Central, from New Orleans to Jackson, and got off and got arrested real quick. And so I like to say the Freedom Rides gave me a free ticket to school and free room and board for the summer. So I stayed. We were trying to, sentences had started off, pretty small. So it was jail, no bail, also gone in. But then they kept upping the sentences. So where people you had 39 days to post bond. And you had to be in Jackson to do it, which if you were in Parchman meant you had to go the week before because they only took people down once a week. Well, I had an intermediate sentence. I had nothing else to do that summer, so I just stayed in jail as long as I could before school started. And it had gotten really crowded in the Hines County Jail before they took us to Parchman. It was in the white women's cell. We calculated we had less than 3 square feet of floor space per person. So people were sleeping underneath the bunks, curled up in the dripping shower stall. They had to do something with us. So they could have put us in the cattle barns, which they did with demonstrators later after Medgar was killed. But around that time, but they decided to take us to Parchman, which was the most notorious prison in the country. Took the prisoners who were on death row and moved them elsewhere in the prison system and put the Freedom Riders on death row, trying to intimidate us. But as a Southerner, I knew their game. And it was roomier, cleaner, and the food was better.
I guess that's one way of putting it. So we're now in the summer of 1961.
Yep.
And you get out of prison when?
In September, just before school started, I think about the first week in September.
So you are now a second-year student in terms of credit at Tougaloo.
At Tougaloo.
And who was your roommate?
Well, at that point, there were like 4 of us in a room. But I think my last year anyway, Joyce Ladner was. And I think students were a little, okay, is she for real? But being Southerners, they were polite. That cuts across racial boundaries in the South. You're polite. And as one woman who's still my friend said, well, I saw you studying just as hard as the rest of us in the library every night. That's when I figured you were okay. And second semester, I hadn't just been on my semester abroad program. It was obvious I was back. And the second year I was back, you had some number of white students later who were coming down and, checking things out. Now, most of them I suspect were really trying to get an understanding of the South. They were Yankees. But I was really there as a student, first and foremost. And And so I was, by the second year, that's when I was invited to join this black sorority.
So you become the first white member of
Delta Sigma Theta.
What led you to the next stage of your activism at that point?
Well, I was just the course of events. I mean, the Deltas had aside from just having fun focus, they also had a contribute to the community focus. And the students who were my closest friends as Deltas were also close friends in the movement. And often there wasn't a whole lot of difference. We made the line that pledged after us, they had to do voter registration work. Maybe not go door to door, because that could endanger their families if they were worried, but they had to do something. Stuff envelopes, back when we stuffed envelopes, run the mimeograph machine, all that good stuff. But Tougaloo was ground zero for the civil rights movement in Mississippi. It got no money from the state. It was supported by northern churches, founded and supported by northern Christians. And so it was a happening place. One of the lead professors there was one of the professors who came, Dr. Berinsky, who came from Germany with the Nazis and became, law. They were law. I think he was even a judge there, but became a professor at Tougaloo. And he wasn't down on the front lines, but he was really in touch with the Jewish community. He would have events on campus, bring in internationally renowned people, and whites, particularly the Jewish community in Jackson, could come out to these events, and he would have the students get there first and sit. I mean, this is basically in a dugout cellar. It's been framed in a little bit. But we would sit on these long benches with a table, maybe this wide, and the benches were on either side of the table. Well, he had us spaced out a little bit, so whites from Jackson had to sit between, or maybe, two whites together, but intermixed with the blacks. There was no escaping it. And, no further than you and I are from each other. It might be a renowned linguist from New Zealand. It might be, Pete Seeger had run into Attorney Kunstler from New York, whose daughter was at Tougaloo, and they knew each other. They got to talking, and Kunstler said where he was going. Well, shoot, back then you could just hop off the plane when you wanted. So Seeger hopped off in Jackson and came out and gave us a hootenanny down in this basement place. But it was good. I mean, whatever was happening, you were right there in the midst of it. It wasn't like Duke, where something was way up at the front of the building and you could barely see it. You were right up close and personal.
At what point do you become more involved with the SNCC office and the core office? I understand that you took an administrative position.
It wasn't. It was sort of semi-official.
Or just explain to us whatever it was and what you did.
SNCC and CORE had a joint office down the street from Medgar Evers' NAACP office. And I could do secretarial work. That was my background, summer jobs in D.C. And just sort of on a volunteer basis, I would be down there, during maybe whenever I could get a ride into town at the time, I would be down there, and particularly in the summer, once they started bringing back the Freedom Riders who had gone on bail, sending letters to them, reminding of their court date, writing and running off, mailing press releases, answering the phone, just whatever little thing needed doing, office-wise, because to have me out in the field, particularly with the black walking with a black person could be hazardous to people's health. But I had a talent or a skill they could use, the office work. And then there was the Freedom House on Rose Street, just sort of down the street and around the corner from the office. And any Snick or sometimes poor person in town could sleep there.
During this period, were you ever under surveillance? The Mississippi Sovereignty Commission?
Oh, I would assume so, yes.
Was this something that you all picked up on, or did you just assume that you were being watched by someone and then kind of adjusted accordingly, like, made decisions not to be impaired? For example, you wouldn't walk with a black person anywhere, or giving people a heads up on how that part of it worked. I think it's, for now, especially younger people, it's hard to imagine that the state is using its own resources to spy on its own citizens.
Isn't it still doing
and then
that?
Intimidate that.
TSA, telephone calls, email surveillance. What else is new? Been there.
Yeah, okay.
In fact,
well,
at the 50th anniversary of the
Yeah.
March on Washington, and people were speaking about this surveillance. The old civil rights folks weren't talking about it. We've been there, done that.
Yeah. That's.
And people were making note of that, but you just assumed that there was somebody. You couldn't necessarily figure out who, but you just and who was going to go talk or who was this or that. But sometimes on the phone, you could hear the noise at the police station and the whirring of the tapes.
So nothing subtle about it.
No, you knew.
Yeah. So are we in 1962 at this point, or?
We can be.
So in 62, you're working part-time in whatever capacity for the Snick and Core office. What kind of relationship did your office have with some of the other offices, particularly in Atlanta? Did your office ever communicate with the Atlanta office? Did you speak much with Julian Bond or Dottie Zellner or Mary King?
I didn't know. Well, Julian, I knew who Julian was because he was so fine looking. But, oh, ladies, let me tell you. And a gentleman. But,
This is all true.
The phone, they finally got a Watts line in so you could phone around a bit. But you didn't have much over the phone communication. It was
Why is
more
that?
cost, and every word was being recorded somewhere. You knew for sure. Deep in your heart, you did believe. And so through the mails. Then there were conferences, Snick conferences in Atlanta twice a year. And that's where you really met the other people from the other groups, the Snick staff and field workers. And so I tried to get to those. And at one point toward the end, there was some debate about having a white member of the inner council of the coordinating committee, but I think it was maybe me and Joyce jointly shared it so that I only had half a role. But that's where I met Julian. Okay. And that's about the only time I'd see him would be at the Snick conferences. And well, he was a married man, a gentleman, so it was a different relationship than some of the other guys like Bernard. But I think we mainly appreciated his fine looks.
The communications apparatus of Snick was very, very sophisticated. Is that a fair assessment, or how would you
think
add
so,
on
but
to
I
that?
really wasn't as much in it. I mean, I was not in Atlanta. I don't really know quite how it all worked, but I knew they got the word out. And something I've taken to saying lately is the demonstrators take it to the street, the lawyers take it to the courts, but the press takes it to the world. You've got to be in touch with the press. Phone calls. Something's going to be happening down on North Capitol Street this afternoon. You didn't want to say specifically because lines can be tapped, or you don't know, da-da-da. But you let the press know what was going to happen, that something was going to happen without being too specific, because you really didn't know yourself. And you depended on the press that way. And the press supported you for the most part. I mean, Nick von Hoffman was totally in support. Sometimes if, you needed to make a phone call and didn't have a dime, remember, the press would give it to you. They were pretty supportive.
Do you remember any other reporters of that era who were supportive of your work? I mean, obviously, they had to maintain an outward facade of objectivity and were covering the story, but underneath it, were there other reporters, and even at that point, maybe broadcast journalists, who were sympathetic to what you all were trying to do and could help you in a way that maybe was more behind the scenes and off the books than something the public might know about?
I'm really not good at names, but there were other reporters. And Bill Miner, bless his heart, was totally with us.
And do you remember who he worked for?
At that point in time, Picayune. And then he was the civil rights man in Mississippi office. And years later, he wrote columns for the Clarion Ledger. And he wrote one about me, which is framed and hanging on the wall. I mean, it doesn't get any better than Simeon Booker was pretty supportive. I mean, even later, when Loki's movie, An Ordinary Hero, came out, at the first showing, the Artist Fair, which was so crowded that the fire marshal was turning people away, but he was sitting right up front.
Was there a difference in how you all sought to communicate or deal with the white press as opposed to the black press?
Not that I remember. And I'm thinking Frank Hunt. I think he was with the Afro. I think he went on freedom rides, and he was down in Rock Hill, and he got, supporting the demonstrators, participating with them sometimes. In Washington, the press was very good. There was a woman who went on to cover Congress, whose name is Susan McBee, maybe? I'd have to pull them out, but she was. And then there was a guy who went on. I mean, they were cub reporters then, but they were really good and passed information in Arlington. And the guy who went on to, I think, had the Moscow office for the Post. They're both dead now, but yeah.
Okay. So why don't we move forward a little bit to the Jackson movement? And obviously we can see on the wall how that all turned out, but tell us how the decision was made to engage in direct action in Jackson.
Well, they've been having boycott. They had picket lines in support of the boycott, and the time came. And I was not in on the decision making, but a sit-in, and I wasn't supposed to be in that sit-in. Lois Chafee, who was a white dorm matron at Tougaloo, and I were supposed to be what they called spotters, people watching what happened and prepared to change to go make a phone call if someone got arrested or violence broke out or whatever. Well, we thought the picket line would last. This was a diversion while the sit-in was supposed to start down at Woolworth. And the picket line got arrested pretty much right away, which surprise. So we phoned Medgar's office, and we hadn't seen any squad cars or anything heading down to Woolworth. No paddy wagons. So we decided to go check that out. And that was basically when all hell broke loose. Now, our mistake was in planning things was we had finished finals at Tougaloo. Good time for us to go after finals. But it was finals week at the nearby at Central High. And the kids could leave the school on their lunch break. And only they couldn't get lunch because we were sitting at the counter. So they didn't like that. And then I think as those young guys are given to doing, one does this and the next one's got to go one more, so one yells something and the next one yells something nastier, and one throws this on you and so the next one grabs something nastier and throws it on you. And so the store was basically being pretty messed up.
And was that movement a core? I'm sorry.
That was
at a Snick core project, NAACP.
NAACP. But you had people from core and Snick who participated. Now Lois and I, when we got down there, things were getting rough, and somebody, probably Ed King, suggested after Memphis was beaten and taken out, the one guy, that we sit and support the girls, sit with them. And then, so then Annie and I got pulled off and out to the front door and got back in, but we couldn't get back to where we'd been sitting, so we took whatever seat we could get to, and John Salter joined us. But it had been started as an NAACP thing, Medgar and John Salter, but Snick people were sitting in, me, and we didn't have quite the competition we had other places. And
when you say competition,
well,
what do you mean?
rivalry with a group, the membership overlapped and we supported each other's actions. But George Raymond was with CORE, who ended up sitting there. So that day got pretty ugly until things got closed. But what I say is, the important story of that day is not getting sugar dumped on my head, because I say I was sweet enough already, But the guy, Fred Blackwell, who took the picture, he had come in as a second string photographer because the first string guy had gone to get his film developed back in the days of film, before your time, for the evening paper. And they sent in second string guy, Fred. Well, Fred had graduated from the same high school as the kids in the crowd. He hung out with the older brothers and, sort of knew a bunch of them. The guy with the cigarette lived 3 doors down the street from him. So these were his people. When he came in, his sympathies were all with the kids from the high school. And Fred got permission to stand on the lunch counter. As the manager said, it's never going to be open again. Sure, you can stand on it. And so you can see the pictures are sort of looking down on us. He could see us there, and he could also see down the counter where the other group of George Raymond and Lois and Lianna and all were sitting.
Joan, I'd like you to talk a little bit about being at the local level. You're in Snick, you're working with CORE. The NAACP is involved in things going on in Mississippi. What was the perspective of people at your level thinking about organizational loyalties compared to, let's say, how people at the top thought about what their organization should be doing and who was doing what? Was there a kind of a gap between what you guys were thinking and then what people at a more national level?
The NAACP was a little more conservative. They believed in taking things through the courts. And of course, Snick believed in taking it to the streets, and Core was more on Yankee philosophy. But on the ground, we could all work together and call on each other's expertise. I mean, where would we have been without the lawyers? Core had different experiences, but they had more money than Snick, so it was good. Snick would pay me my $10 a week, and when they didn't have it, Tom Gaither might slip it to me from Core. But we all supported each other on the ground. And okay, you're going to take up an actions in this town, and we're going to go to that one because you got this one covered. But it wasn't really like, in my experience, like a competition. Now at the national level, I understand it was more, pushing your organization, fundraising being an issue and all that. But they were more professional, New York. They came from a different place, so to speak, both socially, economically. But I think all of us were members of NAACP chapters too. But we were not tuned into them as much as we were to take it to the streets. But I think that's also a generational thing to some extent.
For future generations, could you talk a little bit about what you mean when you say it was a generational thing?
NAACP was more adults, established people that going to jail and taking it to the streets. You had a lot to lose. I think that was a thing with King's group too, that they were more adult roles in the community, families, mortgages, things like that to think about. Whereas the students were more take it to the streets. We didn't have the responsibilities that the older folks had, and we thought that they were a little bit slow on taking it to the streets and supporting that. But at this point, I can see more of the reasoning. I think it's always the college students who aren't bogged down. Well, now you've got student loan debts, which we didn't have, and stuff like that. But you're in a much better position to go in for the direct action thing. But the adults groups often are better spokespeople, because the people that on the national level, the press and all, they're more in that groove.
Well, you've mentioned Medgar Evers a number of times in the course of our conversation this afternoon. His murder, assassination in June of 1963, that could have been something that might have intimidated or pushed people back. Did it have that effect, or did it have the opposite effect? Did his murder do anything to deter the movement that had emerged in
Well, I was
bloom?
not there at the time. I was up in D.C. with the Snick Court, but I think people felt he's died. It could have been any of us. We owe it to him and his memory to carry it forward and maybe up it.
And could you talk for just a minute or two, because this is really the first chance we've had in the course of this project to talk to somebody who could talk about Medgar Evers in a more intimate way, that you obviously worked with him, you knew him. What kind of person was he as far as taking control, giving direction, being a public face? Could you talk a little bit about Medgar's impact and legacy at that point?
Well, Medgar knew that the money for, the NAACP from the North, and that they were more conservative. On the other hand, he was very, well, he was one of the co-planners of the Jackson sit-in and boycott, and that he understood also where the students were coming from. And he understood Mississippi because he was a Mississippian, whereas folks up in New York, somewhere, knew intellectually but not in their gut what Mississippi was. On an individual level, a reporter asked me, the 50th anniversary of his assassination, and the sit-in and all that, what do I remember most about Medgar? And I said his smile. It was the most beautiful smile. Well, that wasn't what he wanted to hear, but that is my lasting memory, that he could just smile in a way that would melt your heart, and not in a romantic sense. Well, maybe Merle has a different take on it. But, well, obviously Merle does. There's Merle's picture over there with my son Loki. Just that you wanted to do things in the movement that he would like. That big smile. The Kennedys, well, they were young and they were Yankees, but they wanted the freedom rides to stop because that was bad for international, publicity. They tried to, they struck that deal with the power structure in Mississippi that they could arrest everybody as long as there was no violence against us. Well, the word goes down, from the top to the Klan and everybody else, that they were not, you had to drag them into even, lawsuits and things. We didn't trust the FBI any further than you could throw them because they were in cahoots with the power structure in Mississippi. On the other hand, you knew you had to get a report off to the FBI of what had happened if you wanted to build your case for further action. So, no, we didn't put much faith in the Kennedys.
And that
they had to be drug into everything that they did. Now, Bobby turned out quite differently.
And do you think his change of heart, his change of position was genuine?
I hope so. I think so, but I don't really know. In the late 60s, early 70s, I was all into having babies and taking care of little kids. I was not, there was an anti-war demonstration here or there, and I would be down there with kids, but I was too far removed. But last year, I was speaking at the University in Lawrence, Kansas, Q&A. They showed my son's movie on the Civil Rights Movement. And the Q&A, and some guy asked a question, and I couldn't quite figure out. I said, well, I'm a Southerner. I need to know where you're from to understand what you're getting at. You understand that?
I certainly do.
And he said, well, I'm from Connecticut. But my wife is from Greenwood, Mississippi, where cotton is king. Well, clearly that man was clueless on what he was saying. So afterwards, I had a chance to meet the wife. I said, oh, you're from Greenwood. Did you know the Beckwiths? It was in Byron Delay. Well, I didn't say it. I said, you know the Beckwiths? Oh, the guy who shot Medgar Evers. She said, oh, yeah, he used to sit in the doorway of the church with a rifle across his lap. Okay. And we knew how to hit the floor. My daddy showed the Kennedy around, the Delta. He was the one who escorted him. And at home, we knew how to hit the floor if we heard a loud noise outside. We could hit the floor and crawl. I said, oh, we used to do that on campus too. And So I knew she knew where I was coming from, but that husband was clueless. But the Kennedy connection was. Yeah, I knew she was okay.
While we're on the subject of the Kennedys, that allows us to get into something else I know is very near and dear to your heart, and that is, of course, the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Can you tell us a little bit about your role in that and how it came about, what your expectations were, how it came off, and then how you consider that moment in the early stages of the Civil Rights Movement?
The March on Washington was a coming together of all the groups. I ended up back in D.C. working at the Washington office, again typing like mad in the press office, and answering phone, but was always typing. And then the day of the march, I was in the press tent handing out stuff, and it was mind-boggling, the crowd. And it was upsetting to us, the students. John Lewis had been so censored in his speech. We cannot march non-violently through the South like Sherman marched through Georgia. Well, that sounded real good to me, but no, that was going too far. You had to have your speech approved ahead of time. So they had to take out little tidbits, and I consider the most brilliant line of the whole time. And then King gave his speech. And then he went totally off script and beyond it with that I Have a Dream business. Well, why wasn't he censored? Why didn't they cut the mics? That wasn't in his approved script. And I think the students felt like, man, get your head out of the clouds and give us a call to action. I have a dream. Now, at this point, looking back, it is a beautiful statement of the world we wanted to see. But what we needed was a call to action. I personally, at the end of the Selma to Montgomery March, and King gave his speech standing at the state capitol where Wallace said, segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. And King said, how long, not long, and spelled out problem by problem and what we need to do. That was his best speech.
Did you attend that speech?
Yes. I was working up here in D.C. and they had chartered trains, not just chartered railway cars, but trains of people who went from D.C. to Montgomery for the last day, and then we were bussed out to where the folks were camped and marched in together. And that speech just did it. In fact, my ticket stub is on display at the African American Museum. If you're at where the stained glass is, combination of my glass and another donation, which is beautifully done. It's sort of over to your right on the far wall, but it's on green construction paper because I had it on display in a locked cabinet at the school where I worked, along with other stuff, Black History Month. And so that was good. But King's speech, I Have a Dream, just didn't cut it with me, or a lot of the younger folks. And the Washington Post did not pick up on King being the, powerful speaker. It was A. Philip Randolph.
What is your
It was a good moment, but it was more like a picnic. Now, we were afraid.
You said more like a picnic?
In a lot of ways. There were fears of riots.
Right.
I mean, the Klan was big in Maryland. The Nazis were in Arlington. There were rumors or reports, depending on how you view it, of the Kennedys were going to call out the National Guard or the federal troops and to prevent the buses and trains from getting to Washington.
Mm-hmm.
And when that didn't happen, when the buses were rolling in, people were coming and coming, that's when it took on a picnic feel for me. It was a great day. And then less than 3 weeks later, we had the Birmingham church bombing.
So in the fall of '63, you're back at Tougaloo for your final year of college.
Yep.
And then you graduate in the spring of 1964, but you did not stay for Freedom Summer.
No.
Can you tell us why you decided to, I don't like to use the phrase leave the movement, but in some ways leave Mississippi?
Say leave Mississippi. I still haven't left the movement.
No, you have not.
Been a good dealer today talking with you.
Indeed,
That's carrying the movement forward.
Yes.
I just felt it was the natural thing to do. When you graduate from college, you usually leave the college, leave the area. But I got a job with the Smithsonian. Found out the lady I worked closest with would ask if she'd have a problem with that because I had been, arrested. But my movement experience was carried over in the jobs I did at the Smithsonian. Oh, you want a burned cross? Yeah. I can get that. You want some picket signs from Durham? Yeah. I know where they are. Down under the stage at the basement of the church. And I didn't personally bring them up, but I arranged this stuff that they got. May or may not have my name on it. I think it's more because the Smithsonian was still not sure it should be collecting this stuff, and they were a little cautious even accessioning them. And the Freedom Rides, we had used envelopes and any scrap of paper we could get to make a deck of cards. I donated mine. I'd forgotten all about that till they pulled it out at the anniversary of the Freedom Rides and had it for people to come by and see it. So I was asked, I could spread my information, I could spread my knowledge. Then I got a job at the Community Relations Service under Roger Wilkins. And I could bring an on-the-ground understanding. I mean, it was just secretarial work, but I could bring an on-the-ground understanding that other folks didn't have to it. And when Snick began, sort of the beginning of Black Power stuff, was having a march in D.C. Not a very big one, but a bit to the streets. And I'm sure this would not have made the records anywhere. But Roger, Undersecretary of Department of Justice, assistant, whatever they call him, those folks would know you, they'd trust you. Go down and find out if they've got food and a place to sleep tonight. So I went down, there's my old buddies, and walked along with them a bit, and found out, they were taken care of. They were staying in what's called the President's Church on the other side of Lafayette Square Park. They were in good hands. I could go back and tell Roger, and otherwise I feel certain he would have started pulling some strings. And I'm also feel 99.9% sure that never made the official records. But I could use my experiences with the movement. When I had kids and I was working just around the corner, my kids were at the elementary school. The kindergarten, all the doll babies in the play corner were white. I made a bunch of rag dolls in every flesh tone I could come up with and clothes for them. I think it was the early 80s. The music teacher was asking for a song that would be good for the international potluck. I said, Lift Every Voice and Sing, the Negro National Anthem would be right good. She taught all the kids, at least in the upper grades, Lift Every Voice and Sing. And they sang it at the dinner. Probably the first school-wide singing of that in the county.
You graduate in 1964 and leave Mississippi, but obviously you made a contribution to Freedom Summer, even though you weren't there for it. Would you talk to us a little bit about how you helped with Freedom Summer before you returned?
Well, like everything else, I typed a lot of voter registration forms. I typed that stuff up and cranked it out and stapled it together, and plans for freedom schools. I think I typed up a lot of that stuff. I typed up and ran off an awful lot of material for Freedom Summer.
And did you do any? Did you help recruit students coming down?
Nope. I had graduation to, deal with.
Yeah,
and partying.
Well, there you go. Did
Truth be told, yeah.
Well, the truth should be told. That's what we're after here. This is
partying.
Scholarship. Truth. We have to find the truth, no matter where.
No fake news.
Nowhere. You're among friends here with that. But at the end of your time in Mississippi, did you think Freedom Summer was a good idea? I'm just curious, as a white woman who's been involved in the movement for a good chunk of time now, did anyone come to you and say, Joan, we're thinking of bringing hundreds of white students down here?
I remember a talk over at the Freedom House, and Bob Moses, the conversation was about Freedom Summer, and the only thing I really remember about it is, recruiting these students. They would be good for press coverage in the North. If their students are down here, their hometown papers, etc., just like with Freedom Summer, with the Freedom Rides, it gets the attention of the North. But somebody is going to get killed, and we know it. We can tell them they may get killed. They won't believe us, but somebody will die. And it was sort of a moral thing. Can we ask them to come down knowing that they will get killed and they won't understand it? But the decision was, yeah.
And we had talked a little bit off camera about you had met the Schwerners, I think.
The Schwerners, yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit about how you met them and maybe anything you might have said to them when they
the
came into Mississippi?
I just arrived down from New York with CORE, because it didn't matter that it was CORE. And everybody came out to Tougaloo when they got in the state. It was the safe haven. And they'd end up over at Reverend King's house. And we would talk to them about what you really need to know. You're a white person working in civil rights in Mississippi, what you need to be aware of. And we had so many people coming through that we just sort of took turns, and it just fell my lot to be the one that talked to them. And no, I really can't remember, but be cautious, be aware of what's around you. Don't antagonize them deliberately, don't fight back. You all are ignorant, and, all that stuff. So I gave them the standard thing, and I don't know what I could. Somebody was going to die that summer. It was almost carload of white folks I was with coming back from Canton, the hardcore town. It was under curfew, and people were getting beat up that day, and a bunch of us went into a mass meeting, making sure everybody in our car was white, so we wouldn't draw attention that way. And we were stopped when we were leaving, sort of in the no man's zone between the old road and the brand new, just opened interstate. And we were supposed to get killed, as it turns out, to stop Freedom Summer. But now, The leader of the opposition party in the Indian legislature parliament had been arrested in Jackson going to a restaurant in support of blacks in Mississippi. And he'd been arrested and jailed, and of course the embassy up here went ballistic and complained to the State Department, who passed the word on down the line to leave the Indians alone, please. And the fact that Hamid Kisselbosh, who lives in D.C., was driving the car, I think it was his car, Ed King started saying, don't hit him, because they were hitting him, I think with a crowbar maybe. He's from India. And we all started saying, he's from India. And they backed off, which would indicate that there was, a line of communication with Washington and on down. And that's what got us out alive a few years ago. I thanked him for saving my life by being an Indian. He was not too happy about it. Their countries were in a virtual state of war, but a Pakistani can be an Indian when necessary. My daddy's white, I think, well, aside from attracting more women, even though he was a married man, as far as I was concerned, hands off, just to lay eyes on him was a pleasure. I think the role of the press is not as appreciated as it should be. And communicating with the press, if you're doing something and nobody knows about it, okay, it has much more limited impact. If it's spread all over the world, that is big time. That is why the TV stations used to have technical difficulties right in the middle of news and Kennedy's speeches and anything, because you don't want the word to get out. And so the press, to me, is maybe even more crucial than the lawyers in changing things, because the lawyers are off in court. The press is taking it to the streets in a different way. And Julian was the press office. I don't know quite what all they did, other people do, but they got the word out. And if you don't get the word out, you're not going to get anywhere.
In your experience, and this is again something just as you can remember, did the white media, outside of a few reporters who maybe understood, or you tell your story about Mr. Blackwell and how that experience kind of transformed him from a segregationist to a supporter of what you were doing. Do you think that Julian's ability to be as polished as he was, to be able to really talk on a moment's notice about really anything, was a way of perhaps bringing the white media into this when, as surprising as it is for many people, not a lot of people really paid that much attention to what was going on, except when there was a big crisis. Was Julian able to kind of put this movement on the map a little bit and make it an ongoing story and to personalize it a little bit perhaps for people?
I think so. And the fact that he was in Atlanta, and one of the more liberal papers in the South was the Atlanta paper. I mean, all that worked together. But yeah, I think making it something, the news, something people can identify with, and a personal relationship with the reporters and publishers helped a lot. And I don't think anybody could have done it better than Julian did, if only because he knew his way around. He knew, he could blend right in, literally and figuratively.
Did his emergence as a national figure in the mid 1960s, it's particularly after his Supreme Court case, Did it surprise you that Julian Bond went from being relatively well known within the civil rights world in the early 1960s to all of a sudden becoming someone who was known nationally?
I think I was so immersed in babies that I missed all that. But Julian, right to the end, was Julian.
Yeah.
And the last time I saw him, we were both going to be at a film festival in London, and his wife was going with him, and maybe Loki was going. I don't know. That was worked out, but we were planning, you know, a little get together in London and a little sightseeing together, and you know, it's just smooth as could be. And then he died, and my knees conked out, and I couldn't go to London because of knee surgery. And that was the end of that. But the last memory was, you know, here's this big guy Julian, and here's little old me, and
You're not so little.
miss nobody in the neighborhood, and you know, volunteer at the local school and stuff. And here he's not too. He still knows his old friends. And we're making plans to go sightseeing in London. I mean, that's mind-boggling to me. Well, it didn't happen, but we were planning it.
Well, thank you so much. It's been an amazing afternoon. So
Thank you.
thank you again.